Over 4 years after the financial crisis began, there are still many banks considered too big to fail, and the sector is still unstable and at times reckless. Economist Luigi Zingales of Chicago's Booth School of Business warns, despite repeated calls for more regulation, bankers and investors are still taking enormous risks without regard for their consequences.
Let's start from ground zero and trying to understand what is the source of banks' instability. We know, and we've been knowing for a long time, that banks are unstable because they are in the business of maturity transformation. They borrow short term and they invest long term, and so that mismatch makes them essentially fragile. So they're subject to run.
Zingales was speaking at a conference organized by NUS's Center for Governance, Institutions and Organizations. He says little has changed since 2008 and points the finger at politicians unwilling or unable to act, and a powerful bank lobby arguing against new rules.
I think that in spite of the 2000 and change pages of the Dodd-Frank Act, I don't think we have in place mechanisms that are sufficient to avoid a repeat of the 2008 financial crisis. Good regulation is costly, and the industry has fought very aggressively, and they won.
Zingales says the problem includes a shadow banking sector piggybacking on the safety net provided by banks and weak regulation.
But I think that the core of the distortion is actually among the lenders. If I know that you're going to be bailed out, I'm happy to lend to you because I consider you risk-free. And so I make my investment at rates that are much lower. In so doing, I'm subsidizing you, and the subsidy is coming from the implicit guarantee of the government. So this creates perverse incentives and also distort the competition.
Zingales unveiled a plan he believes will reduce the risk. Don't consider all debt equal. Holders of long-term debt can usually absorb losses. Rely on monitoring performed by long-term debt while ensuring short-term debt. Create an early intervention system.
We need to create sort of a daily incentives to monitor bankers by the market. And if we know that the government will always come in and bail out the banks, these incentives are not there. So we have sort of rotten kids, in this case, rotten banks. So we need to have to create these incentives, and the simplest way to create these incentives is to make sure that the creditors, when a bank gets into trouble, pay a cost. There is nothing like being burned once to learn not to touch the fire again.
And what role can good governance play in averting another crisis? Professor Bernard Black of Northwestern University in the U.S. wants to know how corporate governance varies from country to country, especially in emerging markets, and can it predict success of companies?
In the U.S., corporate governance doesn't matter that much. We do a pretty good job. Firms don't behave very differently from each other. It's really hard to find effects on the whole. But if you look out in emerging markets, probably governance matters more, and you see larger differences across firms, so you have a greater chance of finding something.
There is little consensus on what qualifies as good governance, and the practice varies from one country to the next.
I'm going to focus on what can firms do that make a difference. I'm going to focus on firm-level corporate governance. Within any given country, subject to any country's rules, does it matter what firms do about their own firm-specific corporate governance? What counts as good or better or optimal governance? How does that vary across countries? How does it vary across firms within countries? What do we mean by corporate governance anyway, right? We talk about it, but we're not quite sure what it is or what's good corporate governance. And if we knew what was good, we wouldn't be quite sure how to measure it.
To study the issue, Black and his team tried to build a board structure relevant to each country, including ownership structure, board procedure, board structure, disclosure, and related party transactions.
We still don't know much about what matters in corporate governance in emerging markets across countries, and I don't see that we're going to know a lot more anytime soon. We're going to get individual, interesting natural experiments in individual countries, and then we're going to scratch our heads and say, well, does this generalize or not? And the answer might often be, we're not sure, and sometimes it'll look like the answer is no.
While Black's research is still ongoing, his early conclusion suggests it's unclear which aspects of corporate governance consistently matter across emerging markets, and that puzzle is unlikely to be solved in the near future.